Welcome to the SAFeTY Chronicles, exploring how to keep people and pets safe from the cycle of interpersonal violence. I am your host, Allie Phillips, founder and CEO of Sheltering Animals and Families Together, the SAFeTY Program, a nonprofit organization working with domestic violence shelters to eliminate the pet housing barrier to safety. As the founder, I have led the global movement in helping domestic violence shelters create on-site pet housing while elevating the criminal justice response to how animal abuse links to crimes against people. I am a former prosecuting attorney, internationally recognized legal expert and public speaker, award-winning author, and advocate for protecting vulnerable victims. In this podcast, we will explore how and why animals are harmed in the cycle of family violence and the human-animal bond that keeps victims in harm's way with their pets. Guest speakers and I will share strategies for shelters and professionals working to safeguard survivors, why pet-inclusive sheltering is life-saving, and safety tips for those who need help. None of the content will be graphic. If you are in harm's way, please contact your nearest domestic violence shelter or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Let's get started. Hey, everybody. I have a treat for us today. So I reached out to Darryl Evey with the Family Assistance Program in Victorville, California, to ask him if he would be our guest today because his shelter has been housing pets on site since 2009. And this shelter was one of the early adopters of this concept. And so I've known Darryl since 2009 when I gave you a grant through the company I was working for. I gave you a grant to help you get yourself launched. And so thank you for being here, because I think talking about sustainability of these programs is so important. And that's what I really want to dive into, because you've been doing this for a hot minute here. And I think it would really help a lot of shelters understand how to sustain their on-site pet housing program. So, but first, can we first dive into just a little bit about you, because you're the executive director, and just tell us about your journey with this shelter.
So I've been the executive director for almost 20 years. I think I'm at 18 or 19, somewhere around there. Previous to that, I've always been in the for-profit world. So it was always a focus of how do I make money? How do I solve the problems of my customers so that I can make money off of them? And I brought that mentality to the nonprofit world, which means when I look at a problem, I look at, hey, what's the solution? What is preventing my customer from using me as their vendor? If I'm selling a product and if there's a customer that can't buy my product, why not? How do I sell myself to that customer? And when I brought that into the nonprofit world, every time I see a barrier, that's what I look for. How do I fix that barrier so that my customer can come to me? So that was a big part. Working for a domestic violence program was strange for me, because at the time I said, I don't know anyone who's a victim of domestic violence. I later learned that's not true, but I didn't think I knew anyone. So I really didn't have much of a desire to work at the agency. So I was just going to be there for a few months. What my real passion was animals. I had been on the board for multiple animal rescue groups. I've always had animals. That's something I've been passionate about. So when the two intersections came along, I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. And then with time, I learned that victims of intimate partner violence don't wear a sign saying that. They don't. And I found that I was amazed at how many friends I had who had been victims, how many relatives I had who had been victims and never really said it. So when I thought this wasn't a problem, and my staff who run the shelter said that this wasn't a problem, I believed them. And it wasn't until someone else came along and told me it was a problem that I was like, oh, wow, maybe we should look into this. And we learned that it really is an issue and it really does need to be addressed. And as long as domestic violence shelters are thinking it's not a problem for them, it won't be a problem for them, because they'll never know what the barrier, that this is a barrier. This truly is a barrier that they just aren't aware of.
Oh my goodness, yes. And I mean, when I'm teaching at conferences about the intersection between domestic violence, child abuse, and animal abuse, and even elder abuse, these are all crimes and conduct that happen in secrecy behind closed doors. And like you said, there's a lot of people who think, oh, not in my family, not in my friend network, not in my community. Well, are you really sure about that? Because with the statistics the way they are, it is happening. And then when you look at how animal abuse links with domestic violence and how animals are targeted as pawns, for the control and the compliance and the secrecy, um, it does create a barrier to safety. So I love that you came to this work, you know, really appreciating and wanting to help animals. And I now I have a greater, deeper appreciation for the program that you created there.
What you said there was exactly, I mean, that aligned right up exactly with our experience. I had been on the board for a animal rescue group. The lady who was the executive director of that group was probably the toughest woman I've ever known. She was scary. People were afraid of her. Nobody questioned her. Nobody argued with her because she was tough. She was tough as nails. And after I started this, working where I'm working now, she was the one that came to me and suggested this. And I said, we talked to our staff and we determined that it hasn't been a barrier. We haven't had anyone ask. And then she told me her story. And I'd known her for 10 or 15 years at that point. She'd been married the whole time, didn't think anything of it. But I didn't know that she had had a previous husband. And she talked about getting married straight out of high school. And he was abusive. And eventually she left him. And this is before cell phones. So she called when he was at work and left a voicemail. I left an answering machine so that he would know that she's getting a divorce and she's going to come pick her stuff up while he's at work the next day with her family and friends. And they came out and he left a note on the kitchen table and said, I have a present for you in the freezer. And she opened the freezer and that's where her cat was.
Oh,
And this woman, um, I mean, at this time, this woman's probably in her late 50s. That happened like 30 years ago. And as she was telling me that, she cried. That's the only time I've ever seen this woman cry. And she cried because of the trauma from 30 years ago. And domestic violence is about power and control. It's about, how do I control this person? How do I exert my power? How do I inflict the most pain? And he truly knew how to inflict the most pain on her.
mhm.
And after that, I thought, okay, so let's say my staff is correct and there isn't a need for this. What's the worst that's going to happen? Let's make it an option. And if no one ever takes care of the option, then okay, fine. We didn't, no harm, no foul, no bad. So then when we got that grant from you, the biggest fear that I heard from everyone is insurance. And they were like, oh, what is the insurance carrier going to say? Well, you wrote a letter for us and a policy, and we submitted that to the insurance carrier, and they're like, yeah, you're good to go, no problem. They weren't concerned at all about it. And we made the changes to the shelter and made it to where it was pet friendly. And I think within 2 weeks, all we had to do was change the questionnaire when people called our hotline and said, do you have any pets? And they say yes. And they say, will your pets be safe if you leave? And the very first person we asked that question to said, oh no, they won't be safe. And we're like, okay, what are you going to do with them? And she's like, I haven't figured that out yet. We're like, well, bring them with you. And she was just so
Wow.
appreciative. She was just like, oh my God, you can do that? It was like she was just, the fact that was this huge load, this weight that was hanging on her, and we were able to remove that weight. We were able to make it to where she just assumed that no way we could accept her pets. And so when we could, it was, like I said, within a week or two of opening, we accepted our first pet. We have had pets at our shelter literally nonstop. And the reason I can say literally is that 2 months after we did this, a stray dog showed up at our shelter. It was a little Shih Tzu, and he showed up, and he was dirty and grimy, and just so nice and friendly. So we asked the neighbors. None of the neighbors knew who he was. They said they'd seen him around for a while, so we took him to the groomer and got him cleaned up, and he became our shelter dog. So we had that shelter dog at our shelter for he got cancer about 4 or 5 years ago and finally died. And then within 2 weeks, the staff were like, "We need to get a new dog." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe we can talk about it." And then 2 weeks later, it's like, "Yeah, we got a new dog." But
Oh, I love that.
yeah, it really is like half the time when I go to the shelter, the one of the clients are sitting on the couch with the dog in his lap, in her lap, or and it really is made everyone happier and friendlier, and now it kind of spread. Now we also run several youth shelters, and two of our youth shelters have shelter pets, and one of them has shelter cats, and the other one has a dog, and everybody's everybody's been really supportive. I have not received any negative feedback from any clients about it. We've had a couple of staff that were a little bit uncomfortable because they were afraid of dogs or cats or whatever, and but they got over it and they were okay. The only thing that came up was an issue at all with us that was the state community care licensing. Shelters for minors have to be licensed through the state, and the licensing analyst came in and said, "You're not allowed to have pets here." And yeah, I was like, "Well, there's nothing wrong with that, blah blah blah." And the end result is, I said, "Okay, show me the regulation that says that we can't have pets here, and I will talk to my legislator, and we will write a new law to fix it." So she went back and talked to her boss, and her boss knew me, and she said, "Yeah, Darryl's not bluffing. He really will write a law to fix this." And they determined that there's no law that prohibits group homes from having pets. So they were fine with it after that.
Oh my gosh. So, yeah, so I love that you just talked about how having pets on site is helping staff. It's improving morale, which of course is going to help with the resilience and the recovery of the clients you are serving. And I love that you said that you started asking the questions when people were calling in seeking shelter, because I think that's where so many shelters are missing an opportunity, and they may think, we do not have this problem. We do not have people with pets wanting to come in. And so I always come back and say, are you asking?
Right.
Once you start asking, you need to brace yourself, because you're going to find out. I mean, two-thirds of American homes have a pet. So if you're not able to serve two-thirds of your community, that is an internal discussion you need to have with yourself as a shelter. What are you doing? You're creating a major barrier to safety.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm glad you started asking that question. So talk about those early days when you started housing pets. Like, you know, you've always had such a can-do attitude. Like, yeah, we're going to do this. Like, yeah, I'm going to write my legislator. I mean, very few people do that. I get so many what ifs from shelters. They literally what if themselves into non-action. So I think you're not the norm. You're just like, of course we're going to do it. But talk about those early days. I mean, did you have any uh-oh, what have we done moments, or was it smooth sailing?
It it was surprisingly smooth. The the a lot of naysayers. And like you just said, I'm not normal. So when I talk to people who are the naysayers, I'm used to that. Uh, the other domestic violence shelters really gave me grief about this. They was like, "Oh, this is and if they're not, if they're afraid to leave their pets behind, then they must really not be in that dangerous of a position." And I said, "You obviously do not love pets." And I would personally, I would sleep under a bush or under a bridge with my dog than in a warm bed without my dog.
And
And
that is happening.
Right.
These are
Exactly.
survivors of domestic violence. I mean, I just a month or so ago did an interview with the founder of Pets of the Homeless, and she said we have a large portion of our population experiencing homelessness that are domestic violence survivors because they are not going to leave their pets behind, like no pet behind attitude. So yeah, boy, you just touched on that in a big way. That's huge.
I would have a problem with someone who would be willing to leave their pet behind, because that
Hmm.
kind of has a psychotic behavior to me. I mean, it's you're and I see that a lot with the homeless. We do a lot of work with people who are unhoused, and the one of the things that they look at is who loves me. Everybody needs to be loved. I mean, we're humans, and unless you're the Unabomber or someone who wants to go live in a hole somewhere, most Americans, most humans want to be loved. And if you don't have family who love you, who's going to love you? Well, that's where pets fit in there. You know, I know that my dog loves me, and I think my wife loves me, but that my dog loves me.
Yeah, I mean, our companion animals are just unconditional in their
Right.
love toward us, and name that in any other portion of society where we can literally be at our worst and they are still there, panting or purring because they're like, oh my gosh, you're my human. Like, I'm just going to be here for you. And I mean, that's such, like, when I think about one of the core foundations of the SAFeTY program, it is the unconditional love of pets that get people out of danger, get them into safety, help them with recovery, help them get back on their feet to living a safe, normalized life. And it's their pet that gets them waking up every day to say, I can do this. I can do the hard things. So,
And if we're not allowing the pet to come with the family, that's creating multiple barriers. That means that the family have to also worry about where their pet is while they're in shelter, trying to worry about themselves. Then
right,
you also have the children, and children are bonded with their pets. And why should a child be have their pet taken away from them just because they're a victim? That shouldn't be the case. And
right.
then why should the pet be punished? I and I know some organizations are kenneling pets because of that's the only option they can come up with. But I encourage all of them to come up with a better option.
Yeah,
If that pet lived roaming the house, why should that pet be stuck in a cage when they did nothing wrong? And
right.
so that's what we do. One of the barriers that we had in the very beginning were staff buy-in. The staff who were big pet lovers, most of them were pretty on board with it. Some of the ones weren't. But they were throwing up all the naysayer stuff. The first question that they all had was, "What about allergies?" But then one of the staff is like, "I'm allergic to dogs. I can't do this." And then they're like, "Well, I'm just going to take a workers' comp claim because you're creating a hostile work environment, and I can't work here because of that." They were fine. The and then client said, well, what if another client is allergic to animals, and now we've got a situation where this client can't come to us and we can't help them because of the animals. And we talked about that. So we're like, well, what can we do? And we worked through it. And what we did is one portion of our house is animal friendly and the rest of the house is not. So we don't have pets in the common areas mostly. So what we've ended up that's how we started. And then what we diverted to is every person that comes in, we ask them about how are you with pets? And if they do not have pets, but they express an aversion, then we allow them to the parent, the human for the other pet to introduce them and see how that goes. And if they become comfortable initially right away, then we continue with everything's fine. But if they come in and they get scared right away, then we're like, okay, then this pet cannot be in the common areas because this
Mhm.
other person's safety trumps the pet's freedom. And
Mhm.
the pet
Yeah.
can be locked in their bedroom and they can go outside into the dog run, the pet run that we built. And you can barely tell, but there's a roof on that pet run, a chain link all the way around. We built
Yeah.
that because of cats. We have a lot of people that have cats. And originally we weren't going to put a top on it, but then the question about the cats came out, and cats, climb, and so we wanted something so it's fully contained in a way that cats can't get out either.
Yeah.
But that allows if we do have someone who is really afraid of animals, or if they are allergic or whatever, we have that. So, and it's really easy to tell which part is which, because the part of the house that's animal friendly has wood flooring, and the house that part of that's not is carpeted.
So what I'm showing on the screen right now, for anybody who's driving in their car and just listens to YouTube podcasts like I do, I'm actually showing a photo of what Darryl and his shelter created. So you have two rooms that are pet friendly, and you put basically a doggy door. You basically broke through the outside wall, put a doggy door where cats, dogs, or, heck, if you have a lizard named Fred, I guess the lizard could crawl out there. And it's a fenced in area. So it's a totally secure, you know, outdoor, have fun, go bark and play and run around and do what you need to do area. So yeah, why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Excuse me. So that's along the side of the house, and up towards to the right of that picture there's a gate right there that opens up, that goes into the backyard, and the backyard is double fenced as well. So it goes into the playground area, and most families want their dog to be able to go out and play with the kids and other people, and so we can open that gate, and then the pet can go outside. They can use the bathroom when they need to, and then they can come back in when they need to. If it's a pet that is a little more standoffish or afraid, then we can close that off so that they can't come and go as they please. But this also allows them, when the kids go outside to play, the dog can go out and play with them and then come back in. And then along the lines about the lizards, yes, we've had lizards. We've had dogs, cats, we've had lizards, we've had snakes. The snake was one issue that did come up, because we have two staff members who were extremely afraid of snakes and wouldn't even go into the bedroom when the snakes were in the bedroom. They were that afraid of them. And that's okay. They don't need to go into those bedrooms. And the one thing about snakes is, usually snakes don't have free range of the house like a dog does, or a cat. So it was okay. We've even had pet goats, and we've had pet chickens. So we've had the whole gambit of animals, and we try to be as friendly towards all of them as possible. But I really like that dog door goes out to that dog run, which can be closed or not, and then that goes into the backyard. So when the kids are outside playing, the dogs or cat or what can run outside and play with them if they want, or they can go back inside the house because they don't want, because this is a new environment. Some pets are afraid because they're in a new environment, and they want to stay in their bedroom for a little while until they get comfortable with it. And then same with cats. We have to be really careful with cats, because you know how they are. We have giant trees everywhere, so the cats disappear, and then their family's all traumatized because their cat's gone.
Yeah, and I mean, I love the flexibility that you have created with this, with the comfort of the pet in mind, but the comfort of the family in mind. And in the SAFeTY program, this is what I call housing option 1, where the pets are in the room. It is the equivalent of you and I. We go on vacation, we find a pet-friendly hotel or a pet-friendly Airbnb, and we pack them up and take them with us. It is that equivalent, and that's what you've built, which is amazing, because it gives the highest level of comfort to the family. Just having their pet there, just snuggling with them, watching a Hallmark movie with them, just literally being there with them, and I just love that. So okay, so you've been doing this since 2009. I can't even do the math on that. I don't even know how many years that is. 15?
15.
So how are you sustaining this? Like, and not only financially and with supplies and stuff like that, but even with staff buy-in, because in any industry, there's an open door. Staff comes in, staff goes out. So just collectively, how are you sustaining this? How have you sustained this for 15 years?
So part of what we did with that first grant that we received was build the dog run, put the little concrete slab down and the dog doors and all of that. And then we pursued another grant. There's probably like 10 different organizations that are doing grants specifically for this.
Mm-hmm.
The second grant we did, we redid the flooring in the part of the house that was pet friendly. And it was fun doing research on flooring. I didn't know anything about flooring, but now I know a lot about flooring. And they have that like percolate or perca something where they're that fake wood that clips together.
Mm-hmm.
They make a version of that that's rubberized, and it looks like flooring. It looks like wood flooring, but it's actually relatively soft. And when I went in to talk to the flooring people about this, I told them I want something that cannot be damaged by water or hammers or claws. And they're like, what? And I explained that dogs might pee. And when that happens, what happens if they go under the bed and they pee and we don't see it and it stays there for a while? I mean, eventually we're going to smell it and wipe it up. But for wood flooring, that would destroy it. But then we also have kids, and the children that we serve, sometimes they think it's a good idea to find a hammer somewhere and then pound on rocks in our house. So I needed something that wouldn't get destroyed from that. And this is what they came up with, this rubberized stuff. So it was like twice as expensive, or maybe 3 times as expensive as that regular cheap flooring. But we've had it in there for 15 years and it's indestructible. This stuff is amazing. So we did that with that section of it. Outside of that, we've been really well. We have a couple of local vets that have been very very supportive and helpful. When we told them who we were and what we were doing, we have one veterinarian locally who has said, absolutely, I'll do it for free. So they do spay and neutering and shots and taking care of things for us. And if it's something expensive, then they charge us for it. But so cost wise, we really haven't had much in the way of costs. We've gotten dog and cat food donated to us, so that's been fine. You know, from a cost, I just don't see it as something to even be concerned about. As far as staff buy-in, one of the things that we've done is when we do hiring, the peers are involved in the hiring, and we also bring clients involved in the hiring. So during the second round of interview, they're being interviewed by 2 clients and 2 staff. And one of the questions that is always going to come up is, how do you feel about pets? And they need to know from day one that what's best for the people we serve is our priority. And if you as a person don't like that, that's okay. I'm not going to have any judgment against you, but this isn't the right place for you. You know, if you don't like children, then you probably don't want to work here because we have kids. And if you don't have pets, you probably don't want to work here because we have pets. And it's a non-negotiable of the job.
I love how you've built that into the culture of current employees and potential, future employees coming in, because at some point you probably are going to want to retire, maybe not, but potentially. And what a way to build that in so that it's sustainable. Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple of shelters where, their pet housing program was literally launched and run by one very passionate person. And when that passionate person was elevated, to a position in another organization, their pet housing program collapsed. And so I'm always preaching, you got to get staff buy-in, you've got to build a culture where, this is just the nature of sheltering. We would never ask somebody to leave their kids behind, and you need to have that same philosophy with pets. So I love that you've done that you're doing that in the interview process.
And the community knows that's who we are.
Yeah.
The community knows that all of our shelters and transitional housing programs are all pet friendly. And other programs call me and ask about that. In California, it's a law that domestic violence shelters that receive state funding are required to address the needs of pets.
Mm-hmm.
And I know of probably 10 or 15 different domestic violence shelters across California who changed and created programs very similar to ours to become pet friendly. There's now a push to make homeless shelters do that as well. And I've been talking with more homeless shelters about that, and they're acknowledging the need. They're understanding the importance of pets. And because that's part of who we are as an agency. If I do leave, I don't think that the new person would be able to make that substantial of a change for the organization. I do totally get what you're talking about, though, as far as things happening. I love rock climbing, and for our youth shelters, I used to take the kids rock climbing at least once a month. And I tried to get more staff buy-in to that, never got the buy-in. And as soon as I was able to where I couldn't take the kids rock climbing, it stopped happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so I'm glad that you have that sustainability already built in. Now, when it comes to like your community, like I'm always preaching to shelters, get community buy-in and your community will support you. I mean, there is just something about this type of program where, I mean, you're tapping into a whole new set of donors. You're getting all the people who love animals and maybe they donate supplies or they donate money. Um, talk about your community and how they are helping you.
The community has been really engaged. We have multiple people who have brought, when we first started doing this, there were people that were bringing us dog and cat food all the time until we got to the point where we had too much. And so now we have a network of people that we contact. So if something comes up, we know who to reach out to. Most of it is we reach out to pet programs. Excuse me. They reach out to different pet programs who are doing this type of work already. There's one program in our community that focuses on providing dog and cat food to the unhoused population. So the people who are homeless, living in encampments or whatever with their pets. This way their pets have food, because one of the things that they brought up is that a lot of times you'll see people who are homeless who are living in an encampment somewhere or in a bridge under the bridge or wherever. They will give their food to their pet if their pet is hungry, and they will do without to do what's best for their pet. And by making sure that they have pet food, it allows them to make sure that the person is able to eat the person food. But
Wow.
the community's been really supportive. It's been really fun to have that help.
Yeah, and that's just something that I have continued to see all across the country, that I mean there is just something about this where it's easy for people to help and it's easy to ask for help. When you need dog leashes, litter boxes, you need kitten food. Thank goodness for social media. I mean, you can always put a request out there, but it's just letting the community know that you are pet inclusive, and people remember that, and they want to support it. So I love that. And I love that you talked about the veterinarians that are also supportive, because I've also found in the veterinary community, they love this program and they want to help. Like they want to be the veterinarian that is known for helping in this sort of situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, I can't think of any other questions. Is there anything else that you want to share about your shelter? Because I have to tell you, you stand out as one of the stellar programs. I cannot think of a presentation that I have done over the last 15 years that has not included you. You are like standard in my presentation, because
Wow.
you've been doing it so long. You had a can-do attitude. You didn't what if yourself out of it. You just did it. You've sustained it, and you haven't had any issues. And that's literally what I talk to the shelters about. I'm like, you do not have to believe me, because sometimes it's like I get crazy alley ideas, and it's like, ooh, let's do this. Let's teach this. Let's make this. Let's create this program and this project. And people are like, oh, there's Allie again with another crazy idea. But I love to say, you don't have to believe me. Contact these shelters. And like you said, you've had shelters contact you, and you're one of the programs that stands head and shoulders above so many, because you just show with ease how it can be done. So I got to thank you for that, because you make my crazy ideas come to reality, and you're like, oh yeah, this is totally doable. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear that our example has helped. But I do have to say, it makes me a little sad. I wish that we were normal. And I don't mean that we downgrade ourselves to normal, but that everyone else elevates themselves to this becoming the standard. The standard should be, if you want to help a family, you have to help the whole family, and the pets are part of the family. There was a time, and I think we're getting there, because there was a time when domestic violence shelters did not accept teenage boys, and that was a normal policy of domestic violence shelters everywhere. And I can't count the number of times that I've talked to people who, 20 years ago couldn't go to a shelter because they had a 15-year-old boy, and they were, I'm not leaving my boy behind. And I thought, how unconscionable. And thinking back on that, almost everybody agrees. How unconscionable is that? You're going to leave your 15-year-old son behind? What on earth could make you think that was a good idea? But that was the policy. And today, that's not the policy. The other policy that was a standard policy 20 years ago is lesbians were not allowed at the shelter. And today that's illegal. And it's not, no one, people think back on that now and they think, I can't believe that was a policy our program had. And I'm hoping that we get to the point where the concept of leaving a pet behind just becomes an embarrassment, and that we would never ask a family to leave a member of their family behind just because they're on four legs, and or that family member needs to be locked in a cage because they're on four legs. I think that we need to treat our families as a family and support them and care about them. And if it's the kind of pet that prefers to live in a cage, because I know there are dogs like that, that's fine. That's fine. That's not a problem. But if it's the type of dog that normally sleeps in the bed with their humans, they should be allowed to do that. So that's why I feel that it's the right thing to do. And I really hope that we get to the point where everything that we're doing is normal and everybody does that. And of course we would do that. Why wouldn't we?
Yep. And that's why I keep doing what I'm doing, because when you came on board, there was, I don't know, maybe a dozen shelters doing this. And now we're over 325 in 46 states and 6 countries. I'm working on the 7th country right now, Portugal. We're going to get Portugal on board. Still got, 5 in the United States that, we're still working on. But yeah, so I mean, it's definitely growing. But when you think about the number of domestic violence shelters, which I think we're over 1,900, that's not enough. That's
Right.
not enough. We got a ways to go. And yeah, it's what you're doing is helping to normalize it. You talking to other shelters is normalizing it, because that's what it needs to be. Pets are part of the family, period.
Right. And we have not had a problem. All the naysayers, everything they said they were going to have problems with allergies, we haven't. People who have allergies, they have allergies. They deal with it, and we do what we can to accommodate them the best we can. But it's never been a position where it's been an issue. The other one that came up is everyone was ready to say, "Oh, what about bites?" We have not had one person get bit at our shelter. It's been 15 years. We have literally, we always have at least one animal. Usually we have 2 or 3. And yet we've never had an animal get pet. The only negative experience we have had, and that is sometimes the children bond with other people's pets.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up playing with their pets, and then now they don't want to leave the shelter and move on to transitional or wherever they're going, and they're upset and they want to bring a pet with them, and they want to bring the pet, and they're like, no, that's not your pet. But I'm gonna miss him, and that's like, that really is the only problem we've ever had, is children crying because they're going to miss their other friends' pets that they're not going to get to see anymore. And as far as problems go, that's not such a bad problem to have.
Yeah, that's actually a good problem, because now there's that human animal bond, and that child, where that bond could have been broken during the abusive, in the abusive environment, that bond has just been reestablished. So that's a child that's going to grow up being kind and compassionate and not hurt animals and not get into that cycle of violence. So yeah, what a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it does create a little bit of a barrier for us in that if they're leaving us to go into a transitional housing program, or if they're leaving us to get into their own place, finding pet friendly places is harder.
Hmm.
Uh, our transitional housing is pet friendly. I have been unsuccessful in getting many of the other organizations and getting their transitional housing programs to be pet friendly. Then there's the pets issue or the apartment. So they're going to get into an apartment somewhere or renting a house or whatever. Rental units are not very pet friendly.
Right.
So fortunately, we have two or three property management companies that we work with, and they trust us. So they have become pretty pet friendly because of that. So, but that's not a barrier that is because we're accepting pets. That's a barrier that that family is going to face either way. But
Hmm.
because we're pet friendly and because we're known in the community to be pet friendly, it allows us to be able to advocate for them and to help the property management companies. And we're able to go to the property manager and say, hey, we can tell you this person and their dog or cat have been at our house for the last 60 days. We have not had a single problem. They haven't been anyone. We haven't done anything wrong. They've taken really good care of them. I can advocate and let you know that you're not going to regret this. And it's mostly worked out.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because in the SAFeTY Startup Manual, I actually recommend that pets go with a reference letter. Basically, this kind of like when an employee leaves and goes with a reference letter to their next organization, send the pets with a reference letter to the landlord saying, "Oh yeah, this pet was perfectly fine," and that goes a long way. It really does.
That's a great idea. We
Yeah.
we just go verbally, but I really like that idea. I think we're going to add that to our goodbye package.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's pretty easy, and I know a couple of shelters who actually write it in the voice of the pet. I was a good boy. I didn't mark anything. I didn't bite anybody. I didn't scratch anybody. I went to the bathroom outside or in a litter box. I played with my toys. I was quiet. And oh my gosh, it's like some of these letters I've seen just crack me up. It's like, oh, who would say no to this? Like, if you have a heart, I would instantly allow that family in because chances are the child's going to be more destructive than the pet.
Right?
It's like, oh my gosh, I just love it. So yeah, that's
And
something
then
to do.
have them sign it at the end when they put their paw print on it.
Paw print, yes. I love that. I love that. Well, Darryl, thank you so much for taking time and sharing about your overwhelmingly successful program. I mean, when I thought about, of the 325 shelters that are in the SAFeTY program, who could I talk to about sustainability? It was a no-brainer. And I'm like, I'm tracking down Darryl because
Great.
I mean, you have such a hugely successful program and kept it simple. And that's the thing, keep it simple. Like we can what if ourselves out of everything. I mean, shelters can actually what if themselves out of even having a shelter.
Right.
So it's,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's the shelters the more problems than anything. The clients, the sometimes law enforcement are our biggest headache. Yeah,
Yes.
it's there's so many things to worry about that honestly, when you asked me the question, I had to stop and think for a second because honestly, I don't even think of this program because this is just part of who we are.
Yeah.
This is something that of course we're going to do that. Why wouldn't we? And it never elevates to being a concern. It's just part of who we are. It's like we give people transportation and we help people get restraining orders and we house children and I mean that's just so I honestly, there was one organization that I've spoken with that had a valid reason to not have pets, sort of. And it was a two-story building, and the upstairs was where the housing was. And they were worried about how do we get them from the upstairs to outside. And they had a fire escape, but they didn't want to take the pets, of course, on the fire escape. So there was an issue on that. And even that, there's ways around that.
Mm-hmm.
But the stairs went through the kitchen and they were concerned about taking animals down the stairs and through the kitchen to get outside because now they have dog hair. But outside of that, every other program I've spoken with has been perfectly comfortable, and it's completely worked for them.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your advocacy and for doing this and normalizing it. So, I mean, you make my job easier being able to talk about your program and telling shelters, you do not have to listen to me. Look at what they're doing in Victorville.
Yep.
Yeah. So thank you. And thank you for being here. Um, I'm just so happy everything is just going so smooth for you, and you've saved a lot of lives over the last 15 years.
Well, and thank you, because like I said, the biggest barrier to starting was getting the insurance company's approval. And you did that. So I really appreciate the work that you've done, and the sample policies and things that you've given us.
Yep. My pleasure. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you know of somebody who works for a domestic violence organization, please send them this podcast and help them understand that they too can become pet inclusive. And it does not have to be problematic. It can be very smooth sailing. So thank you, Darryl. I
Thank you.
appreciate you being here.
Okay. Bye.
If you are in harm's way and need help, please visit the Pet Inclusive Shelter listing at safetyprogram.org, call your nearest domestic violence shelter, or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Want to support our efforts and help us keep the Safety Startup Manual free for domestic violence shelters? Consider donating at safetyprogram.org/donate. Your donation saves lives.